Hello and welcome to already the third video in this series of dynamic segmentation inside out for AOS-CX. In this video I will cover the configuration of downloadable user roles. The good thing about downloadable user roles is that you don't have to configure all the roles on each switch anymore. All the roles are configured centrally on ClearPass. When the role is required for an endpoint, it is downloaded by the switch and stored in memory. It is not stored in the configuration as opposed to the local user role. The downloadable user roles are volatile. They are removed when the switch is rebooted and updated whenever there is a change in the role configuration on ClearPass. If you want to know more about dynamic segmentation and how it works under the hood, there is another great series of videos that covers dynamic segmentation on AOS Switch. And in this new series of videos, I will just focus on the configuration of all the items, the switch, ClearPass, and the gateways. And of course, during the configuration, I will certainly provide you with some more information. It will not just be a configuration exercise. Here's what I will show you in this video. I will start with importing the root certificate into a trusted anchor profile on the switch. Next, I will configure a downloadable user account on the switch. This account will be used to authenticate the switch with ClearPass, and it allows the switch to download the roles through SSL. And then I will show you how to configure downloadable user roles on ClearPass. This includes the configuration of profiles, policies, and services. Before we start with the configuration, this is a diagram with the setup again, showing a gateway cluster that consists of 4 gateways and a conductor, an AOS-CX switch being a 6300, ClearPass Policy Manager, and some other devices that provide the various services like DNS, NTP, and DHCP. If you're deploying this, make sure that you have the proper software versions running on all the devices. Let us dive into the configuration. Maybe it's good to reiterate that for downloadable user roles to work, you need to have NTP and DNS configured. We already did this in the last video, so from a configuration perspective, we should be good. Let me show you the DNS and NTP configuration first. Here's my NTP. My NTP server is 192.168.0.24 and NTP is enabled. And then the DNS is all the way at the bottom. And this is my DNS configuration. Again, it's the same IP address, 192.168.0.24. And that's a private, obviously a private DNS server. And this allows me to ping FQDNs. Next, let me add the root certificate. Adding the root certificate is a manual task on AOS-CX as opposed to an automatic task on AOS Switch. And normally you would have to export that root certificate from ClearPass. This would involve logging into ClearPass, navigate to the certificates, find the right root certificate, and then export it and then import it into the switch. Now there's an easier trick, which is using the so-called well-known URL. This URL contains the root certificate and it allows you to copy and paste this when you import the certificate. Let me show you how this is done. This is the well-known URL. It's basically just navigate to your ClearPass server with this URI, and then you will be presented with the root certificate. I'll just select everything, copy the content, and then move that content into a trusted anchor profile. So let me just configure PKI TA profile. Let's call it ClearPass TA certificates. And now I can paste that certificate into the CLI, confirm with Control D, save the certificate and exit, and done. That's not so difficult. Next is to create a downloadable user role account on the switch. And this account is used for authenticating to ClearPass and allowing the REST API call for downloading the appropriate role. Let me just do that. And so I have this option, ClearPass username. Let's call it dir-admin. So this is the account that is also configured on ClearPass. I'll show you that later on when we review the ClearPass configuration. And there's a ClearPass password. And that's it. That's the configuration on the switch. Let's move to ClearPass. I will show you how to configure the downloadable user roles from scratch. Let's start with the profiles and create a profile for 802.1x. It is a downloadable role enforcement. Let's give it a name. Downloadable user role CX 802.1x. And for the product, I have to select the AOS-CX switch. And this is where the software version comes into play. If you use the latest software version, you'll get this option. So if you use older versions of ClearPass, you might not have this AOS-CX option there. And then in the role configuration tab, you get an extensive form where you can configure all the role parameters instead of having to enter all the commands. ClearPass allows you to configure everything using a GUI, and ClearPass will generate that role for you. So I need to give this a name, and let me assign a VLAN to it. For the 802.1x role, it is VLAN 100. And so I can also configure policies and classes, and I've already configured some of them. Let me show you how that is done. I have the classes here for all the roles and profiles and policies that I'm going to create. So for example, for DHCP, you can see that I'm matching UDP port 67. Let me go back. For example, I have a class AnyTraffic that allows any traffic. This is really a very simple way on how to configure the classes. It's all GUI driven. And then obviously I can add those classes to a policy. Again, I have created the policies already. Let me just assign that policy here. If I click on that one, you can see that I have assigned the class AnyTraffic to that policy with action permit. I can add rules. Obviously, any traffic allows you any traffic, all the traffic, but I can just add classes and perform different actions on those classes. I can set DHCP values. I can set local priorities. I can set the CIR, the CBS, all these things that you typically would set in a policy. Not going to do that. It's already done. So I am assigning the any traffic policy for the 802.1x. And that's really how to configure a profile in general. It's really very straightforward. Next, let me create a profile for the VoIP phone. Downloadable role enforcement for CX. Let's give it a name. And in the role configuration, I'll give it a name as well. I'm using VLAN 110 for the phone. And I have already configured a policy for VoIP traffic. And let me show you that policy. So what I want to achieve with the VoIP phone is that I am permitting VoIP traffic, and I'm setting the VoIP traffic with a DHCP value of 4.6. Let me also show you the class, VoIP traffic class. So you can see here, I'm classifying that VoIP traffic for port 5060, TCP port 5060, and also let me just get the other one, UDP 5060, which is typically SIP traffic. Let me save that profile, and that is the phone profile. Next is the configuration of two profiles that I'm going to use for the captive portal. One profile is used for the traffic redirection and the other profile is used for the guest access. I will start with the redirection profile. Again, a downloadable user role profile. They're all downloadable user roles. And that's the redirect. And let's get into the role configuration. For the redirection, I am using VLAN 110. And I am assigning that captive portal policy. Let me show you the captive portal policy. You can see here the classes. So the ClearPass web class is basically contains the IP address of the captive portal. So this is allowed, and I'm also allowing DHCP, DNS, and dropping ICMP, and all the web traffic is redirected to the captive portal. And then obviously I need to assign a captive portal as well, which is already configured here. It's called ClearPass guest. Let me show you that captive portal. And this is this is the profile, and that's the URL for the guest login. That's the redirection profile. And then let me add the MAC authentication profile. That's for the authenticated guest on the captive portal. Again, very simple. So I'm assigning the guest policy. The main difference between the guest and the redirect policy is that I am permitting web traffic. So instead of redirecting the web traffic, I'm now permitting the web traffic. And using VLAN 120 for the guest, and obviously let's give it a name. And that's really it for the profiles. Name must be specified. Yeah, I forgot to put it in here. The CX guest. And let me just save that one. And done. Now, when I open one of the profiles and check out the summary, you can see in the user role configuration, this is the complete script that is generated by ClearPass. And you can see that this is all just plain CLI. This is really the configuration that you would also see if you have local user roles configured on the switch. And ClearPass does this all for you. Next is the policies. I will start by creating a policy for 802.1x. That's the easiest one. Let's give it a name, the CX 802.1x. My default profile would be deny access, and let me configure the rules. Really very simple. When the user is authenticated, I am granted access, and I can assign the CX 802.1x profile. Next, let me add the web auth policy. This is obviously a web auth policy. Let's call it CX web auth. I'm gonna set a default profile. Doesn't really matter that much. Adding a rule set. So really for web auth, uh, the profile should be triggered based on successful authentication. So, and that's again an easy one, similar to the 802.1x. If the user is authenticated, what I then need to do is I need to bounce the switchboard. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do a post authentication captive portal update expiry. And let me just, so this is the policy. Let me just show you what that profile does. This profile, really what it does is it updates the endpoint database and sets the MAC auth expiry time to an edit 1 day, and it's setting the username in that endpoints database. And then the third policy is the policy for MAC authentication. Let's give that a name as well. MAC auth. It's a radius. I'm also gonna set the default to deny. And for the default, for the MAC authentication policy, I need to define different rules. So I need to define rules for the IP phone, for the guest users, and for captive portal using the cached roles and the redirection rule set. So let me add those rules. Let me start with the IP phone. And with the IP phone, I'm going to use the endpoints repository category parameter to identify that IP phone, VoIP phone, and based on that parameter, I'm going to push the CX phone profile. Save. Adding another rule, and this is for the MAC caching. So this is for the third authentication of the captive portal. It's using the cached authentication function of ClearPass, so it will automatically authenticate for the third time and allow the guest user to access the network. Role equals MAC caching. And for this, I need to assign the guest role. And what I'm also going to do is there's a DINSEC return username profile. I need to find that one here in the list. That's that one. Let me also show you what this DINSEC return username does. Well, really, it basically returns the username information from the authentication request into and it gives it back to ClearPass. So save. And then let me just add the third rule. This is for the redirection. So if my role equals user authenticated, so if the user is authenticated for the first time, I need to assign that redirect role. .cx redirect. Save, save. Okay, let's quickly show you that DINSEC profile. So really all this profile does is it's returning the IETF username back to the system. That's all it does. And that's it for the policies. Um, let's move to the services. And they look very similar to the services that we have configured for the local user roles. Actually, they're exactly the same. The main difference is the enforcement. So instead of enforcing a local user role, we're using the downloadable user role policies. And you can see, so I'm editing the macauth downloadable user role service, and you can see the rule sets here that are assigned to that policy. Let's do the same for, so that's the macauth. Let's do the same for the web authentication. I am assigning the dir-cx web auth. You can see that here. And for the .1x, dir-cx.1x, I am assigning that dir-cx 802.1x policy. You also notice the list sequence of the services. I've put the dir services above the lur services. So the downloadable user role services are enforced first and then the lur services. The reason for this is that I want really, so the reason for this is that I want to have the dir service to be evaluated first. If I would have put the dir services below the lur services, the local user role services would be triggered. Now, if I want to have both services to be active, I need to configure some service rules that distinguish the service. I'm not going to do that now, but basically what you have to do is if you want to use them both, you need to set some service rules here to distinguish those services. And the way to do that really is to check out the access tracker and see what triggers those services. Before we put this to the test, I also need to show you the downloadable user role account. And you can find that downloadable user role account here in the administration admin users. You see this dir admin user, and this has the privilege level of Aruba user role download. So this is an embedded role that you can find in ClearPass. Now we're ready to test. Let's connect up a phone and check out the access tracker. And yeah, so the phone is booting, so we have to wait a wee while. Okay, let me check out the access tracker. You can see that the enforcement profile dir-cx phone is used, and this is pushed to the switch. Let's move to the switch and check out the port. You can see that the role is pushed here. If I show detailed, you can see that the downloadable user role is pushed and it's successful. Including all the class and policy information. So this is good. Now let's connect a PC on the back of the IP phone. And so this PC has 802.1x enabled. Let me log in. Okay, so that seems to be running fine. I'm also getting an IP address in the 10100 range, which is also good. And let me move to ClearPass. You can see the employee login here and the role that is pushed. That also seems to work fine. And showing the port access, so I should see the phone role being assigned. So this is the .1x, and the phone is, let me see, the phone role is here. So this is my employee role, 802.1x.1x authenticated, and I've got the MAC authentication here. That's also working fine. And then finally the captive portal client. Let me just, so what I've done is I've disabled 802.1x on the client, and I'm just reconnecting that client again. And this should trigger the captive portal page, which is fine. And let me just log in as guest. And this should bounce the port. Let me just quickly move to the client information here, the interface information. You can see that the port is bounced now because there is no role assigned. And now you can see that there is a role assigned again, which is for the phone. And when I just try again, there should be so that's the phone, and there is a guest role now as well, which is downloaded. So you can see all the policy and class information here. And then when I check the client, I should have an IP address in VLAN 120, which is fine as well. Let's quickly show you the access tracker. So this is the web authentication here, setting the captive portal update expiry and bouncing the switch port. This is the redirect for the client, sending the redirect role. And this is the third authentication, sending the CX guest role. All working fine. In the next video, I will demonstrate downloadable user roles with user-based tunneling. If you like the video, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please let us know. Thanks for watching again, and I hope to see you soon on this channel.